For this episode, I'm going to be talking to Luciano, who's quite well known for his work with Children of Ash, a project that he's heavily involved with, and Lars, who is an archaeologist in Denmark, and they've been working a lot together on just deepening their understanding of Viking art. And I have to say, it's completely blown my mind. Some of the things that Luciano has revealed to me of what he's found in Viking art. And it's had a deep impact on me after 10 years of practicing Viking art and studying it in my tattoo work. So in this talk as well, as always, I found it incredibly interesting to hear what these guys had to say on it and their findings. For instance, we talked quite deeply about the Jelling style, which is one of the middle Viking Age art styles. So before we get into this, I will just say we make a point of really going in depth into some of this stuff. So if you aren't aware of the different Viking art styles, then I suggest that you head over and maybe type in on Google Viking art styles and have a brief look at the different styles through the timeline. It's a bit crude what you will find out there, but it's better to have some sort of an insight into what we're talking about than absolutely nothing. So let's do this. All right, so I am here with Luciano and Lars. We'll start off by if you guys could introduce yourselves, first of all, with what you do. I'll start with you, Luciano.
Hi. It's a bit complicated. I am an artist, a tattooer, and a long-time Viking reenactor. And I have taken into researching Viking art a few years ago, and it got to become one of my main activities.
Nice. Well, we'll be elaborating on a lot more of that then. Lars, could you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a field archaeologist at a small museum in southern Denmark called Sønderskov. And because I've been in charge of excavating a large gold hoard called the Fested Hoard, I've been specializing in the styles because I have to understand the styles to understand what I'm excavating, really. So for a while, I've been looking very much into the Jelling style, and from there, I've developed my interests. And through that, I've learned Luciano to know. So that's my entry to this, and I'm a reenactor as well, actually.
I hear that you guys met each other because you were interested in Luciano's tattoo work after seeing his intense study of the Viking artwork and incorporating that into his tattoo work.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, when I started looking into tattoos, how do you say? When I having a tattoo, it's because of memories. I'm not very good at remembering, but by having tattoos, I get these memories of what I've been doing through my life. And Luciano is the only one in Denmark who is doing the original styles, speaking the language of the styles. And given that I am very interested in these styles, then I have to do it right when I'm doing it. So that's why I picked Luciano, and that's why we learned each other to know.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to take this moment to elaborate on what it is that I think you're saying there, because I know Luciano's been doing a horrific amount of work into the micro details of what make these styles, and also sort of taking out his own personal artistic preferences, not preferences, but his inner artist, and just speaking the language of the artist that worked in the past.
Yeah, that sounds right.
So I think that we should elaborate on what that is then, because Luciano, I've been lucky enough to talk with you on many occasions now about some of these the vocabulary of these Viking art styles.
Mm-hmm.
So would you just elaborate on those a little bit?
Well, it's an interesting subject because, through through our work with Lars, because we were researching some specific designs he wanted to do, is started to look into the particular details of certain styles, and they started to, as we were proceeding, these styles were starting to fall apart in smaller groups, and it soon, through research, we're going beyond the tattooing thing, because it started to become a passion. We started to realize that, we were not talking about styles as had been classified in books and academically, like a few decades ago, but they broke down in smaller groups, and that were very probably connected with workshops, with specific groups of people that had a specific kind of style or sub-style of their own, and from there you actually can spot the connections between these workshops. So what you end up is not with 6 styles, but with a huge network of workshops that have been in touch, or have heard of, or have seen some work by by other workshops, and have been influenced, and you can actually spot the details of that. So that's pretty much how it developed.
Yeah. It is really interesting to think about how that whole idea of master and apprentice and so on, how that would have influenced artworks that would have traveled across the Viking world, since that's the time period we're talking about and everything, and how people could have possibly joined other workshops, or even just visited there to use it when they were passing through or whatever, and left their mark. And or like you say, how items could have ended, like a passing tradesman could have bought something or sold something to a workshop, and then it inspired them to try and keep up with the times, as well as the idea of royal workshops as well. So just on that subject, would you tell me what you guys think about, like, say, some of those top workshops that were the archetypes for the styles?
I can do my entry to it, because that's actually what I at some point I'm to write a PhD in some of this. It's the connection with the dynasties, and especially the Jelling dynasties. That means Gorm the Old and his son Harald Bluetooth. And my entry to this is really that by studying the styles and the distribution of the styles, especially the unique works, we should be able to see the development of especially the Danish kingdom, and how the alliances spread out. So you see the development of the early Denmark really, and how it developed in this dynasty called the Jelling dynasty. And it's quite evident that we see these workshops in the larger Danish cities. That's Heidelberg, and for some parts Viborg up north, and it's parts of Ribe where we see the molds for these pieces. And those are cities that were controlled by the early kings. So there is a clear connection between these very elaborate workshops that use granulation and filigree especially to do the patterns of what they want to do. And in this workshop, it seems like they were doing some specific sets of jewelry that the king's alliances, the friends of the kings could wear to represent his power in the local communities. So that's my entry to it, really. So studying these royal workshops is what I'm doing. I hope it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, it does to me.
Cool.
Well, in specific, we were, we talked about it with Lars for a long time. It's It's a specific kind of jewelry. I mean, I think it has to do with sets of jewelry, because there are also the crosses connected to them. So you were talking about a larger set of pieces that they found the molds of in Hedeby, and then they found the actual pieces around Scandinavia. So
exactly.
And specifically some brooches with filigree on top, so the molds that they found is of the base of the brooch, and then on top of that, all the beasts were made in filigree, either of silver or gold.
I heard the idea of there being like blanks. Almost of like I think that you're alluding to here, like the idea of, let's just say, a blank Thor's hammer, and then the metal workers could purchase them or whatever, and then ornament them themselves in their own fashion. Do you think that was a thing?
Can I answer this? Not really. It seems like that they were created at the same spot by one smith, really, a silver worker, a gold worker, and we see less elaborate molds at less elaborate sites, but the most elaborate works are at the royal sites, really. So there is a connection between the very elaborate stuff and the less elaborate works, and these blanks are just because they were blanks. It's because it's actually not good work. It's just because it was shaped like that when being created by the melting process, really.
Yeah. Is there a possibility that, let's just say that they had a blank for, let's just say, a Thor's hammer, and that they made 50 of those and then ornamented them in different ways within one workshop?
With filigree or granulation, or how do you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, because every one of them will become unique afterwards, really. They are within the same overall shape, but they will be decorated by hand uniquely afterwards. So yes, that's a thing. But the amount of these works in granulation and filigree there are not that many, really. So it's just because they are so well known. In comparison, I would say, I don't have a proper number, but in Denmark, the metal detector archaeologists find one Thor's hammer maybe per week or second week. We only have, I don't know, I'm not even sure we have one in Denmark with filigree or granulation yet. So it doesn't add up, really.
Yeah.
So what basically what we've been talking about, and about these sets, that they were not like, you shouldn't think about them as a sort of industrial, jewelry production.
Yeah, certainly at this level, they didn't want to flood the market, I imagine.
But they had a different, the specimens, the sets that we are talking about, were connected to the royal houses, had a different purpose. They were actually made for marketing the kingdom. So branding the name. And it looks that, it's as the more the kingdom got consolidated, the less important this was. Just correct me if I'm wrong. It seemed
it's fully true, because it stops with the end of the Ringerike style, really. And in earnest, it doesn't exist at all. This thing where you show off your connection with the kings through the styles and the presence. So no, you're right.
How do you think that people would have connected these items to the new power then? If was it literally just that they were that impressive that they would never, they wouldn't have seen anything like it, or was there, because obviously we know that there's a particular language to these styles. Would the viewers have recognized the style, or would they just be impressed with what they see?
I'm quite confident that they would be aware of what they were seeing, because the change of the styles happens so fast here in Denmark, especially. And it does seem like that when the use of, for instance, Jelling style disc brooches are done, by this thing of showing your connection to the king. When Gorm the older died, it does seem like his things were just thrown to the ground becoming a hoard, really. And then the Mammon style and the other styles developed afterwards quite fast. So it's like Harold was the son of Gorm, and he had his relationship to Gorm was not that good. So he was in a hurry to create a new style to show what he was doing. He was the new king. He had a wish of showing this by creating a new style that he showed off quite fast in Denmark.
So obviously now it's just speculation because we don't have any evidence for this then, but do you think those the artwork we're talking about here, do you think that would have been, or what other mediums do you think that would have been expressed through as well that we no longer have?
I'm not sure I understand this question.
So say we're talking about the Jelling style.
Mm.
The Jelling, the artwork is on very small pieces of metal, either way that we have. Do you think that this would have been expressed on a larger canvas that would have been more visible to people in any form?
Yes, very much so. We see it on wooden works and stones in the later periods, especially. But it's very much shown on other canvases. So it's the metal thing with the gold and the silver is just a thing to show alliances, really. So it's also written in the sagas, in the texts, that the king or the top of society would give a ring to the ones below him in the herd. I'm not sure that's the proper English word, but his followers, really, they would get a ring of gold or something like that. And so it is actually described in the text that these presents were given among the extremely rich and the ones below. So the use of other canvases is definitely also a thing.
Yeah, also there's a whole, like in Jelling style specifically, there is a number of horse harness bows that display the specific styles. Actually, they're quite interesting as objects because you can actually spot the development of the within Jelling style. So there's a horse harness bows from Mammon that are in very early Jelling style, and then there is the Celestial harness bow is in very mature, very accomplished Jelling style, and on the discs, like these homages, these alliance marketing devices in silver and gold, with they had specific specific symbology. They were devised in 2, 3, even 4 beasts, either in silver and gold. So presumably they actually indicated the importance of the subject to the king in that sense. So there is a lot of and what we found out together with Lars, because I started putting these disc brooches next to each other, and I started dissecting the design structure, and it was very, very similar, but there were some differences. Actually, 3 different points that indicated that there was a development from within the style. So within Jelling, you're talking about from very early to very late, and there is a number of points from the sharpening of the ribbon in some parts, the extension of some, the side tracking of some ribbons in the beast, like hooks and stuff, which in the early style is not present at all, and the transformation of the hip from sort of chicken thigh into an actual spiral which starts to be visible by the end of the the Jelling style. So there's several points that indicate the sequence of the developments within the style. So you actually we actually can pretty much tell which of these disc brooches was produced first and what next, and consequently, it's likely that we can just pretty much have an idea of the sequence of alliances.
Wow, that's very cool. So, where would you place the Jelling cup then? Where would you place that within the development of the style?
I would put it pretty early, really. It's quite particular as a piece because it's made in a bit of a different way as it usually is. I don't know. It's hard to tell. I actually, strangely enough, I didn't think too much about the Jelling cup in that sense.
Yeah, I've always personally thought it's quite a crude execution of the artwork compared to how it's displayed on some other things. It's not. I mean, I know. It's not one of my favorite items from that's been found out the ground, but that's me.
Yeah, but I understand. It's it looks a bit. It doesn't look so aesthetically accomplished in that sense, but that's not really necessarily a parameter for that. I mean, it's like there are hooks and there are some characteristics that put it not to the very, very early part of the style, because actually there's like spiral, hip spirals, which is very late development. It's also made in an unusual technique if you compare it to the filigree part of of Jelling.
So am I correct in saying that was found in Gorm the Elder's burial mound, and it was the only item found in there?
In the grave?
Yeah.
No, it was robbed, so we don't know.
I know the grave was robbed, but I think that's the only thing that was left behind. That's what I heard.
There are some built pieces as well, also in Jelling style, which are very elaborate.
Okay.
And there is a small cross, actually, a cross-shaped pendant. And then when they re-excavated the robbery hole, they were able to go down into the original chamber, and actually the inner sides of the panels, wooden panels, were decorated with human figures and some primitive, not really primitive, but the interpretations of the works became primitive, really, so they didn't understand what they were seeing. But you see wooden panels painted in what could be Jelling style, actually.
No way! I have not seen that. I need to try and see that.
It's not well known, actually. It's basically published in a shitty book.
Yeah.
Not shitty, but not that well known book, and it's not that thoroughly written, actually, sadly enough. So there's a new project made by the National Museum of Denmark, which is trying to. It's hard to say do better, but I'm pretty certain that it will become better than the earlier works.
Do you know anything about what colors were used in the painting?
Red is an ochre red is quite. Is one of the more often used colors. Then there are some shades of what I would describe as pale yellow, but you also have to consider that these panels were taken out as in the 1800s, if I recall correctly. So the restoration was not conducted very gentle. So I'm not certain that the colors has been saved in a proper way.
Shame.
Yeah, it is. But I'm pretty certain that that's within the new, within the new works that the National Museum is trying to do, is to reconstruct the colors, for instance.
Yeah. I think there's something I always like to try and stress whenever I'm talking about the visuals of the Viking Age in general. Really, that when it came to the aristocracy, especially, they would have been very colourful, and it was not like many shades of brown like it is in the show Vikings, for instance. But
no, it's true. It's very true.
Yeah.
Especially among the elite or the higher parts of society, you would see a lot of colors. And actually, we see a lot of new finds every day here in Denmark because of these amateurs with detectors. So it's almost like when the Terslave styles arise in Denmark, the use of pendants becomes very normal, it seems. And these pendants are not made in bronze as we see them today. They are actually tinned or covered in white metal on the back and gold on the front, so they would shine from every angle you would see them. And that seems to be very important with these pieces.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. So Luciano, I know you've done a lot of work into the origins of the styles. I've heard you mention many times that Gotland would have been a big contributor to almost the hipsters of the Viking Age setting the.
Absolutely, definitely, yes. They were very, very influential. They started being influential before the Viking Age. They had an international business, very likely in slave trade, and their wealth probably attracted a lot of craftsmen, and that consolidated in workshops that probably had quite a high repute. And at the moment, I'm actually investigating a connection that I'd already noticed, but it's becoming more and more. I actually talked to you about it. Every once in a while, I bring some Celtic, Celtic-like pieces from Norway that I find in the database, and. There is this interesting connection between Gotland and Norway, and the British Isles, maybe Ireland. It looks from what the pieces are like, and it's a very solid one because it's based very much on the technique that was used in, and it generated the first Viking styles, and I looked into how it was constructed, and the very basics of the knotwork that we are used to see in Viking art, which is very organic, much freer in a way than the monastic Celtic work from the British Isles. It actually seems to find its base in the actual technique of metal working, and of exceptionally small pieces. By the way, it's incredible the way they are done. I spoke to Eric about it. We had a discussion about how they could be made, because they're way. It's like in particular now I'm looking into the Broa hoard that gives the name to the Broa style, the first of Viking styles, if that at all, because it's in some academic books, it's actually placed in the Vendel period. So it's pretty much across these two styles. And from what I've been looking into, it's actually the technique that made this, that that actually influenced the shapes and how they actually became the way they were. It's a relatively long period for what we know as Viking styles, which ranged between, say, 50, 75 years, Lars?
Yeah, give or take.
Yeah, give or take. And this one was quite a bit longer, and it actually goes back into it's a long brewing a process that gave origin to brass style, and brass style has pretty much all the characteristics that you see in the later styles. It looks as if they looked back and they picked certain parts of that styles in a way or other. It's a sort of matrix of all styles. It's amazing. It's how it's constructed.
So I think it's worth saying at this point that like one of the defining features of Viking art is the obsession with the triskel knot and the angles within the triskel.
Definitely,
that
yes.
Subdivision of the Trinity within it, and that's something where after talking to you a lot about this, and then looking at the artwork that's expressed in the Viking Age, it was one of those. It was very sad to realize that I'd been touching on it for a long time through my career, but I hadn't quite got it down in that sense. But that's the thing, isn't it? It's all about exploration and trying to better yourself with your understanding of all of the stuff, because there isn't a handbook as of yet, which I know that you're probably going to be working on creating at some point.
Absolutely.
And I think that's also a point that's now that it's a good point to say about the whole thing of not only have I been within my artwork, so with this newfound knowledge that I have, I still don't make a point within my current artwork now of just trying to make it super traditional, because it depends on what I'm doing with my clients of who I'm tattooing. And that's also one of the things, Lars, I think you were alluding to with some of the other tattooers in Denmark as well, is that this idea of what Viking artwork is still in development, and especially since it's been getting reconstructed from the bottom up out of nothing, where I think I was talking with, it was either with Colin Dale, who taught all that about this, of the idea that Viking artwork in the 60s or 70s was horned, helmeted, muscular men in furry boots, with their chests out, and how it's taken a long time to sort of develop through everything to get to, a better understanding of it. And obviously, I'm not saying that like every artist out there should be, trying to eliminate their own aesthetics out of this. It's just very interesting to know that, the you guys are defining the vocabulary of what is Viking art.
It's very complicated. I mean, it's complicated for us as well. I mean, as I'm studying deeper into this, I mean, it's like I was fascinated by Viking art for a long time, and I had a number of intuitions about it. But now I'm just actually proving certain points. And the main point that connects very much with what you're saying, with what tattooers need to do and want to do, etc. It also connects with what I have been doing. The hard part is that to actually understand Viking art, you need to change your aesthetic point of view. You need to break down your aesthetic, basic view, the way you look at things. You have to eliminate that first, and then you start looking into something else, something that is not what you're used to. Like they didn't see symmetry. We talked about this before, as we see it. We were born into into an aesthetic point of view that views mirror symmetry as perfection. They saw it as something to avoid. Pretty much, they loved balance, but they just shunned perfect mirror symmetry. That already is difficult to make. To make a client digest. It's like this has to be different on both sides, but it's my two shoulders. They have to be exactly the same. It's like, from the point of view of a Viking, it shouldn't. It actually shouldn't. And that's only one of the things that you need to break down. I mean, it's a bit like the first podcast you had here was with Neil Price, and actually he's been a great inspiration for both me and Lars. And pretty much what we try to do is to actually enter the head of these people. So the first thing you need to do when you go into this kind of art and actually try to understand it from their point of view, not from what we like about it and what we find interesting, but what they saw in it. You need to eliminate your own aesthetic point of view, which, you need to realize that it's based on a Christian point of view, whether you're Christian or not. The majority of the art that is connected with the epics that people love and like to see in tattoos, it's very, very Christian. It's not Christian in themes necessarily, but it's Christian in the way it's depicted. It's actually what I'm doing right now with the first style of Viking art is actually picking into something that goes way before Christianization, a complete different aesthetic point of view. It's like our Christian legacy, and that rested on the Greek-Roman depiction of life and afterlife and everything that is depictable, really. It's like monsters or, the nightmares. You can have anything. We have this view that it has to be depicted in a sort of way that we can make heads and tails of it, as we look at it. And their point of view from the first, in the first style, the Bro style, is that they didn't think so. They thought that they had a sort of visual humility of thinking we are reaching out into a spirit world that is not, that it's very different from ours. So why should it have our own rules? So in their depictions, you see a sort of bridge form. So like it's a bridge depiction. You can see certain features, that are recognizable as a lion's leg or, a bird's, posture and things. But the specific features of the heads and stuff are like totally distorted as you would expect in a dimension that is not our own.
Yeah, I think that's it's very interesting to see that through through so many time periods that ability to, because some people can have a tendency to look at these and think like, oh well, they were just trying to draw animals badly, whatever. But then when it came to them drawing, a horse and a rider, they do it spot on. So it shows that they do have the ability to do realism if they choose to. They're just choosing to do things in a psychedelic way.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think as well it is one of those things, like you say, that the idea of you can train yourself to. Well, we are already trained by the world that we live in now to view things with certain aesthetics, and then when people look at the ancient stuff, they like one that I hear a lot every time I sort of suggest to people, like let's put a bit of something like Bora style in there, of the crazy little smiling monkey beasts, strangling themselves and strangling their friends. Because I really love working with that style. I think it's one of those that, when you look up closer, the creatures, they are odd and uncomfortable, but then there's also the visual effect when you take a step back. How you look at it from a step back, it's completely different, and the play that it has on your eyes is, it's one of those that it's what I'm saying is that at first glance, that style, just comes across as very peculiar to people. That's something that they don't understand. And I think that something I've been thinking about a lot within art recently is when I look at stuff from the past, I think that there's usually a good reason it was getting created in the first place, because someone spent time making stuff, and that, it's important to try and figure out that language of why it was getting done and what they were trying to say with this stuff. But also I think there's the idea that there are some artists out there, just as there are now, that I don't like their aesthetics. I don't like their aesthetics now, and there's some pieces from the past I don't like their aesthetics then.
Absolutely, definitely.
Yeah. But there again, those ones aren't going to catch on as much if the broader population doesn't like them.
Of course.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, what I found interesting is, for example, in through the style, there seemed to have been a sort of minimum common denominator for certain recognizable forms. You can see it very well in the runestone or the picture stones between Ringerike and Ernest. You can see very, very sharp trend makers. I mean, it's like very, very, very good artists, that know their proportions, their stylistic shapes, the swoosh, as Eric calls it. Perfectly, and so
I would call it poetic flow.
Yeah, exactly. But he's got a very basic way of describing things. I like it a lot. Yeah.
No, I like it too. It's good.
And you see those trendsetters, and you see also others that are really, really bad. One of the big names in Ernest style is this Opie that had this very weird heads of beasts with eyes that were turned around, as like as in a drop, that as normally is in one direction with the point forward. He had them with the point backwards. Very strange heads, and he did a lot of them, and I really don't like his style at all, absolutely. And there are some others that were absolutely very, lowly skilled, but what's very interesting about them is that you can always spot what they meant. So very unskilled craftsmen just, I don't know how, but they knew how to give an idea of what they meant. Their relationship to these higher standards made by these trendsetters. There is this connection. They didn't go completely, their own way and started making stickmen, for instance. They were very crude, the beast heads and etc. But you can actually tell what they meant. They didn't have the actual ability to refine them so well, but it's interesting how they had a connection amongst each other. the more talented and the less talented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always think that's kind of interesting where you see, like, within tattoo work where someone has tried to do a Viking inspired tattoo for the first time and they've not done any research before it in any way and they just go at it and it just looks like spaghetti madness to me. But there again, it's because I have quite high standards of what I want to see. But,
yes. Of course, but I mean, it's like it's even more complicated because these people that just give it a shot. They both have a different aesthetic system and no knowledge of the refined work. So it's completely out there. So yes, of course, it will look very, very, very weird, very out there, and disconnected.
So. Lars, can you elaborate some more on the idea of these rock star trendsetter artists in their day, in the Viking Age?
The thing is, we don't know that much about them really. We just know where they were situated, and that were in the cities that were under the control of the dynasties really. So that's the major cities. Furthermore, we see some traces of their work at least, or their molds at the what we consider royal farmsteads, royal farms, and these sites are emerging in pretty much all parts of at least Denmark at the moment, where we have the most important at what's called Tisø, the lake of Tyr, and I'm excavating a site called Fæsted/Harby, which means the sacred city, and at those sites where we see the tendency to that are considered sacred sites, that's also the places where the smiths were doing their work, and so we tend to see them as traveling with the kings really. So they were part of the inner circle, if we can say that. And that's pretty much all we know. In the later parts, in the early medieval periods, we start to see the names of them, but we do not know any names in the Viking era. And that's a bit peculiar because we know some names at least of the coin makers. And they were taken in from abroad. In Heidelberg, we think at least some of the workers were taken from abroad as well. They were actually kidnapped, it seems, from, if I recall correctly, Dorestad in Friesland, really. That city were destroyed, and the Danish king took in all of the workers. And a part of them seems like they were becoming a part of the team that traveled with the kings. So we don't know much more than that.
There is some. I mean, it's like talking about rock stars. If you look at the only thing we know about the early styles in that sense is what you see at Oseberg, pretty much.
True.
Those, they look, they are very distinct workshops working there, and they are very high quality, pretty much all of them. And you can actually see from the connections from different parts of their structure and their technique, shapes, workshop connections that, you can be pretty sure that some came from Norway. And as we said before, there was a connection with Gotland. Pretty sure that some of these rock stars that were actually hired by the two magic ladies of Oseberg came from Gotland. They could pick and choose the rock star they wanted.
Yeah,
pretty much, yes. And all the objects that that were found at Oseberg were, except the burial chamber were actually used before. So both the ship was 14 years old when it was buried, and the sleds were also old, probably older. The wagon was probably from even more than that. It's been suggested.
But all of these,
yeah,
the ship was built of Norwegian wood, wasn't it?
Yes, but from a different area of Norway. Actually, from the very west coast, they found actually an island where the wood comes from.
Oh, it's impressive that they can mark that down. But that, because a lot of what we've talked about so far suggests that one of the main innovators right currently, what we're talking about, is Gotland, and but a lot of the action is happening in Denmark. But this also shows that, especially in the early Viking Age, there was a lot going on the west coast of Norway as well.
Definitely.
Actually, I think it's a matter of the laws on the detector archaeology in every country. Really, if we are very liberal about the use of detectors here in Denmark, so that means we are seeing a very high amount of new finds, as I said, every day. And in Norway, they do not have as strict rules as they do in Sweden, but in Sweden, it's almost impossible to use a metal detector, and that means at the moment they are not seeing a development in their understanding of the sites and the finds that are supposed to be found at those sites. So at some point, if they become more liberal, they will see the same development, really. So in my mind, I think at some point we'll start seeing simultaneously developments of the styles, and that also shows this traveling tendency of the metal workers, in my mind at least.
Well, there's certainly a lot of evidence of that through the brooches that have been found. Luciano, I know you've done a lot of work on that.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, certain styles seem to actually have touched more certain regions. I mean, it's like I've been, they were threatening to close down an archive, so I'm actually downloading a gazillion images from Norway, from this archive. I just put that, downloaded some, I don't know, 3.5 gigabytes of images, and mostly they are turtle brooches. So they are a lot. I knew mostly from the ones in Gotland and Birka, but the ones found in Norway are an enormous amount, and they, and they display, everything between Bra style and Bohr style. But they are much more fluid. I mean, it's like, and everything up to there seems to have been very widespread on this line, Gotland, Gotland, Norway. But the later styles seem to have more connections with the rise of the kingdom of Denmark. There's also very, very little connection, for example, there's very little Jelling in Norway or in Gotland. Pretty much nothing. It's as if what we were talking about, they were actually branding styles. So there may have been actual regulations connected to them. There is something in Gotland that resembles a sort of sub-Mammon style, but you need to really know your stuff very well to actually recognize it as such. They were trying to, it's really, really difficult to, we're really talking about a big network of different things, and the problem, I mean, Bra-style was actually the sort of initiator of all these things, and Bra-style it's a bit complex to actually define, because it's a bit simplistic as saying that Oseberg is a very clear example, because in Oseberg you see a lot of different trends and different directions. There is those gripping beasts that would, become a very central part of Bora style, but there are also other forms and directions that are completely disconnected from that. So you can't say that, gripping beasts are Boris style. It's actually a trend that started earlier. It's looking at the trends that were in Gotland. Actually, I found, I got, started being surprised that there's not only, I was looking at Boris style material, and I started finding sub styles in that. At least 2 or 3. Some more abstract, some more, that there's nothing. Seems very little to do with the skill, but actually, it's was a sort of interpretation of certain things. It's much like certain tattooers do with the neo-Nordic stuff. They interpret things in the same themes in different in different forms and shapes.
Yeah.
So some shapes, there is one specific theme of a human figure, like sort of in a sort of lotus for position, with like sitting with either arms up or or hair on the side, but it's always the same theme, and sometimes you can actually recognize it. And when it's actually depicted in a different, by a different school, by different, the same theme, but through a different style form, it actually looks so abstract that you couldn't recognize it as such if you didn't know of the same theme in a more figurative form. So Boris style is one of the styles that I'm expecting to actually bring the most surprises. It will probably blow up into a number of styles. So it's very complicated.
There's something I've come across a few times recently, which is, like, say, on the Osselberg Prow, there's the carvings of the more human-like depictions, and then there's within that there's the we'll just call them like human-like creatures, and then they kind of have their legs folded back over them, and they're holding onto the legs, or they're very, very strange. But that is a motif that pops up a few times over in various ways, and recently I've come across a few depictions of it where there's one or two where you're unsure if it's legs that are folded back, like feet literally touching the ears and holding onto them, or if it's birds. And then there's another one that I saw on this brooch where it's been changed into birds, and then it's sort of a character holding onto 2 birds either side, but it's very much come from that idea of the legs.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit like Chinese whispers within art.
Yeah, but that's you're totally right. There was a different interpretation. Sometimes you see the exact same theme that like as a if you took off your glasses and couldn't see very well what it was, you could pretty much spot that it's the same kind of theme. But if you look at the two different interpretations, you go like, this is birds and this is something else. There's a lot of transformation, ambiguity. Another thing I found that was very interesting, that's also interesting for us, because I actually got to spot it through the comments of people. I looked at these very abstract creatures from the early styles, especially Broa style, and also some of the Oseberg creatures, and people look at the heads of the beasts, and they see a face, and through the research of how it's structured, that face they see doesn't seem to be the right face. Actually, it's plumage on the head. So there is another face that you can't really see directly. And I thought, okay, that's just our bad interpretation. But it kept on going on and on and on. And generally, the functional face and head of the beast is the least visible. Generally, you have two, in this kind of creatures, you have two possible faces, like those images where you see the two people kissing in the vase, so you can actually see, one head or the other head. Well, I've come to the conclusion that they actually meant it to be like that. They wanted a certain type of, there was a meaning to the ambiguity. So both faces, both the one that you spot immediately and the other one that actually you need to search for, they're both there and they have a place there. So they in Oseberg there's actually spelled out there are creatures with two bodies, three heads, it's like one creature with two bodies and three heads. So it's this kind of multiple facets of beings. It's also weaved in the it's really not only an illustration. There's some deeper layers going on.
I've seen some carvings of some creatures that I think are from Dublin, and they look like they have more sets of eyes than just two eyes as well. They almost look like it could just be stylistic, but it does look like they're supposed to have 3 or 4 eyes on each side, which is also a little bit odd. And there's also that idea of why not, if that's what they want to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's something I've been looking forward to asking you on this, because I know you've said a few times about the idea of. So I know you've already stated or mentioned within this that you can put the defined styles into subcategories within that, like especially the evolution within the styles, like Jelling is mentioned. But are there any other like dynasties, for instance, of styles of dynasties that aren't recognized that you guys think deserve a place in the history books as well?
Can I start?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as I'm not fully understanding the use of the Borer style yet. Actually, this thing of using these disc fibulas and the sets of jewelries that the Jelling dynasty used were actually starting already with the Borer style, where we have similar disc brooches but with different motifs, really. And these are found throughout all of Denmark and parts of Sweden at least. But I'm not fully certain which dynasty were using this style. And that's a struggle to me, because it does seem like that some Swedes were taking over at least southern parts of Denmark, and we see these disc fibulas as well. But it seems like that the Jelling dynasty at least were inspired by this use of the Borer style, and that's how it started. So, but what I'm lacking to know is how it all started with this Borer style thing. So there is a dynasty that we are not understanding at all.
Yeah,
like a pre-Jelling dynasty.
Yeah, exactly. Pre-Jelling, what's going on in Denmark with the kings before? We simply don't know yet.
I suppose it always sort of seemed to me about the idea of the Borer style almost been used more as the more common people's style, possibly, as opposed to something so specific. But I mean, saying that, it's very clear that there's that creature within it that is very particular, that we don't know what it means. That I agree. I think that it could be to do with the dynasty that we don't know about.
But actually, I'm fully certain that the Borer style is also have some very elaborate work, and I actually showed a new piece to Luciano yesterday, which was just found yesterday, and it has all of the same features as the later styles when being created. It has gold, it has silver, it has the use of niello, it has the use of granulation and filigree as well. It has the same tendencies and uses of elaborate works, really. So it's just a matter of breaking it down to who were the dynasty that started this thing with the use, and how far back can we really see this within the Byzantine emperors and the very elite. We see the same use of disc fibulas with pendants coming down from the shoulders, and that's actually what we see here in Denmark as well. We're just 500 years later in that process, but it seems like that we are looking back into what used to be in the antique, not antique, but the Byzantine empires. Yeah, exactly. So some sort of renaissance in the use of jewelry, but it's a northern renaissance, really. So we just need to figure out who initiated this process up here.
Very interesting.
There's also, what you were talking about, some parts, some sort of jewelry, like some parts of Bora looking like a more simplified kind of things. It also has to do with, you can actually see it in Jelling style as well, is that, there is different, well, not only Jelling style, you see it in different styles, that there is even in earnest style, there is a sort of blueprint. There is the higher form of these arts, and then there is copies, and the copies are not just done with lesser skill. Sometimes they need to copy the technique that is used in a lesser technical means that they have. So what is commonly known, or considered that in the Jelling style bodies there is this hatching, Well, that hatching is actually a translation in simple terms of filigree. So it's a simplified version of a more precious formula, in its higher arts, And that happened in many ways. I mean, you can actually see the same kind of shapes that were done in the engraving of the Broa style, actually translated in a flat form in engravings of antler or ivory in Mammon style, for example. But they make sense on a technical level in Broa style, but they just translate it into another material, So sometimes they look a little flatter, a little dimmer in their royalty,
Oh, it's fascinating to hear. It's nice to hear it articulated into someone. So I just thought it'd be nice to elaborate on a little bit how there's some similarity between the idea of what. So we're talking about what you now call New Nordic, which I think is a pretty nice term for the Nordic inspired work that's been getting done through tattoo work in the last 30, 40 years. I'm not quite sure how long it is. That's something I want to look into more. But say within that, like I mentioned previously, how that's been getting reconstructed from the bottom up. There's also been some trendsetters along the way that I personally really admire and so on. And they have set their own styles that even now people are copying to various degrees of execution, of some doing it well and some that have been inspired to do their own thing, to some people that are butchering it just as much as it was getting done in the Viking Age as well. So that it's kind of interesting to show that some things don't change.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that's all I wanted to add. But yeah, if you got anything you want to add,
I got a
go
little
for it.
piece. I don't know if I showed you to Lars that piece of that napkin holder from the 1900s that was made in Viking-esque style. I think I'm going to send it to you Sean. You'll love it because it's interesting. It's funny to see something from 100 years ago with their interpretation, which is just as far from the original as the new Nordic things are. There's this different aesthetic point of view. It's kind of cute to see. Yeah, there's definitely that. There's these different things going on. But there's a lot of things to this new Nordic thing. Maybe we should talk about it another time. It's quite interesting. I mean, I find it interesting that the tattooing of this neo Nordic thing has also influenced the idea of this nostalgic look to a pre-Christian time, which in reality, when you're talking about the Viking Age, most of what people pine for is a Christian time, really. But they've got this idea that before Christianity, men were more freer in their connection with nature and everything. This kind of and yeah, I find it quite interesting how tattooing in a way has also influenced the which periods were picked through this pagan history from the Bronze Age and then the Viking Age, but very little in between. For example, there's a couple of Celtic hotspots, but the rest, like the migration period is on a very low pitch and things like that. For example, when I get somebody interested in what I do with Children of Ash, they said, "Oh, very interesting what you're doing." It's like, are you going to do any petroglyph art? And I go, I do Viking art. There's nothing, it's like, if I did modern art, it would be much more connected, to Viking art than the petroglyphs. It's quite interesting how these periods were chosen into this sort of in imaginary. I mean, it's like it was the same in in the 1800s where they invented lots of these cults and these ideas, the Valknut, the knot of the fallen, giving it specific names, so they had this imaginary world. But there is a modern one that is, that connects certain parts of history in an interesting fashion. I think it's quite fascinating, really.
I think it's the same idea as, say, the Druids and Stonehenge. How, say, petroglyphs and the petroglyph stuff done in the Bronze Age period, and the Viking Age. How it just goes under a banner of Nordic. And you could throw in, some of the Icelandic later, stave magic stuff as well, and how that all just gets grouped up into just Nordic.
Yeah, exactly.
And, I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, it's wonderful to have like a romanticism that attracts people to it all, but then there's it's also one of those, as you get a bit deeper, it's, there's a point, I feel, where, if you've been into it for a while, it's kind of, I think it's nice to get a little deeper into the understanding of it and to, mentalize it a little more.
What's also the interesting thing is that that's the main thing that attracted me in the first place when I started doing reenactment. When I started doing reenactment, I was very young, and I was full of these ideas of chivalry and the hero on the horse with a sword and etc. And then as I started to discover things, I started to, find that what was actually there to be found was much more interesting than my imaginary thing. There are things that are hidden in there that actually go much further, are much more mind-blowing than just the epics of it. They epic in a totally different, surprising way. It actually in some ways you actually you get so deep into things, like looking at symmetry and the aesthetics, that you get the idea that you're so deep into the Viking mind that you can just turn around and see yourself. See how they would have seen us. And that's way more fascinating than any modern epic, with an axe at a metal concert. You know what I mean? I can see the fascination, but that is mind blowing. It's just like entering, as if for a second you can actually touch an individual over there.
All right. Well, I think we'll leave it at that for this point then, if you guys are cool with that.
Cool.
And
absolutely.
And I mean, depending on how busy you guys are in the future, if anyone has any questions that they would like us to elaborate on, maybe we could get together and talk